Coming up, we provide an update from Joe Shane on the injury status of one Daniel Jones, where he stands from a confidence standpoint in the current QB, also the negotiations with Saquon Barkley, and looking at the top of the draft, alternative options for the New York Football Giants to potentially build a 2024 successful team. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where I am your host, Adam Armbrecht. As always, appreciating you guys joining us on YouTube, on the podcast feed, wherever you support the show. Continue to do so and follow us over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht and at One Giant Podcast, also at AndyMac214. We dive in, obviously, with the updates, the questions, the conversations from Joe Shane and Daniel Jones. Where do they currently stand on him, and how much of this should be treated as pure hearsay from the Giants GM as we work our way towards the combine this weekend, which we'll touch on, and ultimately the draft, right? What is this team going to do? So, care of Ed Valentine and a lot of media members, obviously, this coming from Big Blue View, though, for the quotes. Where does Joe Shane stand on Daniel Jones? Well, first, the injury update here. Joe Shane said he is on track. He's doing everything he can to get back. We're optimistic about where he is. And there's some talk in the spring that he may be able to go through, whether it's 7-on-7 or individual throwing routes on air, and he'll be able to do some of that stuff. We probably won't expose him on the team activities, but every patient responds differently to surgery. So, knock on wood, we haven't had any setbacks. He hasn't had any setbacks. And if he continues on this pace, he should be ready for training camp. Throwing from a seated position right now, not throwing from a standing position. Again, it is true, right? Everybody responds differently. Now, the global question about Daniel Jones, or from the fan base, maybe it's no longer a question on if he should be the quarterback going forward for this team. Well, that's certainly at least a little bit separate. But on the surface here, we are talking about Daniel Jones and saying, well, at least from a health standpoint, he's progressing where he can be a viable option going into training camp. And why does this matter? Well, regardless of whether or not you go into the draft and take a quarterback at the top, whether you trade up, whether you get a guy in the mid rounds, whether you sign a veteran on the market, right? No matter what you choose to do, you still need live bodies in camp. And Joe Shane did go on to mention here later in this, which is certainly a footnote, but he did mention that Tyrod Taylor is not out of the picture. Tyrod is in the mix there too. We're going to talk to Tyrod's representatives this week, and Tyrod is a true pro. He's been really good for not only Daniel, but Tommy DeVito and his progress throughout the year. He's a true pro, so we address the position. Again, it can be through free agency, and it doesn't preclude us from doing it in the draft as well. So just why even Tyrod Taylor's name gets thrown into this mix is because of the injury concerns and wanting to have healthy bodies, wanting to be able to develop, whether it's second, third year players, whether it's the rookie class, right? You need to have guys that are capable of being in camp and providing that type of consistency from the QB spot so you can develop and work your system with everybody. So that's as much a factor here with Daniel Jones' health, regardless of the long-term view. So it is a positive update, at least on an individual level, from the injury standpoint for Daniel Jones. Now, also, Joe Shane says that I have faith in Daniel. I have faith in Daniel as our starting quarterback. Now, obviously, he goes on to say that's the ultimate goal here when asked about trying to build a roster, trying to compete for what? The Super Bowl, right? Everybody wants to win a Super Bowl, so we want to win the Super Bowl. It's not one position. You've got to build a good team. You have to have good surrounding parts. There's a lot of good quarterbacks that haven't won Super Bowls, so you have to have a good team. And so it's not just the QB position, he went on to say. You have to continue to build the team around the quarterback, and it's an important position. I think you have to build pieces around him. And also, just for context here, before we break down how much truth we think there is in the faith of Daniel Jones and the path forward for Big Blue, when he asked about, talking about what were the circumstances for Daniel Jones, even setting his injuries aside, he did say that Jones was fighting, quote, an uphill battle because of some of the things that happened in the early 2023 season. Quote, when you lose your left tackle, lose your center, and lose your running back, and those core offensive pieces that we put together only got to play 60 snaps together, Waller, Saquon, Andrew Thomas, and Daniel. It's hard when you put together an offseason plan and those are the kind of the four core pieces and they're not out there together. So that's a lot of the circumstances, but we're going to continue to build and look in other areas that we can improve. And again, continue to build it the right way. So here's the two sides of this coin for me when it comes to Joe Schoen and the way that he speaks about these things. On the one hand, you could say, as you do around this time of year, well, they're not going to reveal anything, right? The Giants are heavily interested. They really like Caleb Williams. Well, of course they do. Every team, objectively, whether you need a quarterback or not, could tell you that they really like the profile of a QB. And specifically keeping it centric to one QB can then start to get this association of, well, they're telling you they really love Caleb Williams. So that means maybe he's the only guy that they would move up for. And if they can't get him, then they're not going to take a QB. And then they can wait patiently at 6 and have somebody fall to them. All of this stuff can be associated, as Andy would say, is, well, why would you tip your hand to any of these things, right? It doesn't help you at all to telegraph what your intentions are. That being said, the one thing that we have mentioned time and again with Joe Schoen since becoming the Giants GM, he does communicate somewhat, clearly in terms of the perspective. He does set a tone about how he feels about a given topic. So with Daniel Jones, excuse me, I think obviously because he did give him the contract, so he is now tied to him. It's no longer, well, Dave Gettleman drafted him and he's not my guy. No, sorry. You signed him to the 4-year deal. Even if it has the 2-year out, you committed money to him. So he now is your quarterback, right? So there's a little bit of that. I need to be understanding that people perceptually associate me now with Daniel Jones in that decision. But again, I do believe that on some level, the Giants, Joe Schoen, Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, obviously all of the chain of command to John Mayer potentially, they look and say, if we examine just the injuries that we went through this past season, it's not hard to at least acknowledge that that would have an impact on the success for the team overall and for the quarterback on an individual level. Point stop. The real thing for me here is, even beyond what you think Daniel Jones is that the injuries are as much a part of this as anything with him. Even if you're Joe Schoen and you believe in Daniel Jones, you can't believe that he will be healthy, right? So that's as big a factor to go along with obviously the production or lack thereof. We can pull little pockets. We can pull the Minnesota playoff game from 2 postseasons ago and say, hey, look, they were capable with Daniel Jones. He was the leader of that winning game against Minnesota. Okay, great. It doesn't change the fact that you can't rely on him necessarily. And it doesn't change the fact that the big question really is about, are these franchise guys? When Joe Schoen mentions, hey, plenty of really good quarterbacks have not won Super Bowls. Okay, great. But there's also an understanding around, Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl, but also he's Dan Marino, right? There are these tiers that these quarterbacks do fall into, and Daniel Jones does not exist in, obviously, the Dan Marino conversation, but he might not even exist necessarily in the, can you be a consistent, healthy, regular season winning quarterback that gets us to the playoffs, and then we live with those results? That's all stuff that we don't need to rehash here per se. So that's where the indications from Joe Schoen are, we're going to have this guy in camp. Hopefully he progresses with the injury and we have another live body, right? That matters there. On drafting a QB now, as we turn our attention to the top of the draft here, we are at 6, excuse me. We're going to look at everything. We're going to look at everything. We're going to look at all positions, Joe Schoen said. And again, you hope you're not up there again. You don't want to be picking in the top 10 or the top whatever, but it's a good draft. It's a solid draft across the board. And we're going to have an opportunity to get a player, good player, and we're going to evaluate all the positions and take the best player that we can. Schoen also added that Jones understands that we're going to need to add a quarterback. On that part of it, he mentioned about, whether it's at the top of the draft, maybe it's middle of the draft here. This is where I wanted to step outside a little bit when we think about the combine coming up and just mention something that may not be high on Giants fans' minds. But I had asked this actually over on Twitter as well about how would we feel? How is the team going to feel, the fan base, excuse me, going to feel in terms of the likeliest outcome in this offseason, including free agency, including the draft? How would you feel if we talked about the Giants either trading up from 6 to get a top 3 QB, drafting a mid-round QB, or signing a veteran, right? When I put that out there, the highest likely result from the fan base, 43% nearly saying drafting a mid-round QB. So what does that tell you? It doesn't tell you necessarily what the fan base wants the team to do, but it takes into account the way Joe Schoen is speaking. It takes into account where that money is right now, and it takes into account the overall roster and the needs they have, and saying, Well, if we get a valuable player, a player that we think profiles well for our Brian Dable system, our Mike Kafka system, and we believe that Brian Dable can develop quarterbacks very well and maximize what they are, then maybe we find a guy that precludes us from needing to bring back Tyrod Taylor or a veteran. That puts us in a spot to say, even if a year later Daniel Jones isn't here and we're getting another quarterback that's going to be the starter, the thing you never had to do with Eli Manning was really develop a strong backup quarterback. Why? Because Eli Manning was never not going to be on the field. But would I rather have somebody else as the number two over Tommy DeVito, as good of a story as that was? Yeah, potentially. Do I want Tommy DeVito to have every opportunity to win that number two job in camp? Sure. Like that could be a real steal for the New York Football Giants. But you need to make an environment where there is a pressure and there is a comparison to be made around where the value is. So I did just briefly like step outside of myself here to think about a couple of these guys, like a Joe Milton III. Joe Milton III out of Tennessee. When you think about a player who projects right now, obviously a mobile pocket quarterback, has some really nice things that you like about his game, the rushing, the scrambling, listen, the deep throw accuracy, there's areas that he needs to develop and get more consistent and better at. But if you're talking about a 6th round pick projection here, and I'm looking at the New York Football Giants and their current crop of picks, yeah, I know I have 6th overall and I have 39th and I have 47 and I have 70 and I have 107. But when I get to 139, if I think that the Giants are going to take a wide receiver maybe at 6 that we'll talk about here, the other option, maybe trading down from 6 a couple of spots. If at 39 and 47, I'm looking at maybe offensive line, right? Do I want to add a piece on the interior? Where do we stand on Evan Neal currently? What have we done in free agency to improve this team to create a clear needs hierarchy? Cornerback is going to be a big factor here, playing on the other side of Deonte Banks. So I know that I may come out of 639, 47, and even 70 and say, I've gotten an elite weapon for the offense. I've helped the offensive line as well. I've added to the edge rusher linebacker room. I've given ourselves another secondary player. If I've done those things in those first 4 picks, those top 100 picks, well, now when I get to 107, 139, and 184, I'm not talking about, hey, who cares? But I am looking at it a little bit differently, right? Best player available matters. But if you start to talk about having conversations in that range of, hey, we're going to take a look at a player that maybe could develop. Trey Hawkins is a good example, right? Flashed early and then settled kind of into where you think a late round cornerback is going to end up playing, right? Now, what his future looks like, we'll see. Hopefully, he can stay on this roster and continue to develop. But that's the difference here. That's the difference of looking at a quarterback and saying, listen, if I get a year of this player just learning a system, and then at the end of the season, we want to have that option to move off of Daniel Jones, and we want to have that option to have a player in place that has come along, okay. I think you have to consider that a viable option. And you have to consider it a viable option in case Daniel Jones isn't ready for the regular season, in case Daniel Jones suffers another injury along the way, right? These fail safes matter, and developing some system players doesn't hurt. I'll also just throw out the Taulia Tagovailoa, brother of Tua, playing at Maryland here. He's obviously an undersized version of Tua, which you think, boy, that's hard. That's hard to have that be the case, standing at just 5'10 and just 200 pounds. But you go in and look at the competition he played against, the deep throw accuracy, understands systems well, has a little bit of bulk to him to be able to be a mobile and running quarterback that you could utilize. Sure. If I'm, then by the way, undrafted free agent that we're talking about. We're not even talking about using a draft pick on this kid potentially. We're just talking about bringing in another live body to camp and having an opportunity to examine these players. So it's a way that you think about these things in sometimes different ways that open up the possibilities of how Joe Shane perceives it. Now, coming up in a second, let's talk about that discussion on one Saquon Barkley. What does Joe Shane say now? What has he said in the past? And what can it tell us about where we stand with Saquon Barkley, including, a current projection on what his contract's going to look like and whether or not Joe Shane and the Giants should have an appetite for that? We'll get into that in just 1 second. But first, we tell you about our friends over at Manscaped. Oh, baby. We're coming to the end of February, so that means New Year's check-in kind of time. We don't always necessarily stick to all of the resolutions that we had. I want to be in better shape. And the month hasn't gone according to plan here. But I got plenty more of the year ahead to get that in order. The other thing I wanted to do was get myself into a good grooming habit, and that is where Manscaped comes in. Newsflash, it's never too late to level up your grooming game and keep your entire body, top to bottom, tamed, trimmed, and in order. That's why Manscaped's new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, and turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're going for a trim or a clean shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. Trusted by over 10 million men worldwide. Now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our exclusive offer. You go to manscaped.com, you use promo code OGP24. You're going to get 20% off and free shipping. The ball is dropped, but don't drop the ball on your balls. That's a little clever line there as well. Not to mention, man, you can also get a look at the MVP of 2024, Manscaped's 5th generation lawnmower. You can get a look at their 2 skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. Yes, there's even a deodorant for your balls, chafing action, but you didn't think that you might need it until you start using it. The full grooming kit, which is the Performance Package 5.0, you get that lawnmower, you get the ear and nose hair trimmer, you get the essential aftercare products, including the aftershave lotion, the crop preserver, and yes, that sweet, sweet deodorant. As a gesture for the new year, they even threw in 2 free gifts, the Boxers 2.0 and the Shed 2.0 toiletry bag, because they know good and well that if you're still rocking the Boxers from high school, you want to get a nice pair of them around you. So let's go ahead and face it. Resolutions might come and go, but a well-groomed resolution is here to stay thanks to Manscaped. Get 20% off at manscaped.com with our exclusive promo code OGP24. You go ahead and 20% off plus the free shipping. You go ahead and embrace a new you and definitely embrace a new trimmer care of Manscaped. Now, friends, as we talk about the Saquon Barkley of it all. So this is where, again, there is some transparency to the way Joe Schoen feels about things. Doesn't mean he's not taking a quarterback, but he clearly would love if Daniel Jones worked out because he paid him money. He would love if he worked out because it means if he chooses to go away from quarterback at the top of the draft, that he can add more weapons and add more pieces, and he can at least be a mid-level successful, helping this team win football games quarterback and allow you to have some stability in your organization. But sometimes big swings need to happen. Now, when we turned it over, obviously, to the Saquon Barkley of it all, here's where we first start. We start with the PFF report that came out with a projection, I should say. Saquon Barkley, 3 years, $36.8 million projected contract, $20.1 million guaranteed, 12.3 AAV. Now, do the Giants have an appetite for that type of contract? It's really hard for me to look at that and think 2 things. One, with the increase of the cap, it's not insane. Like 12.3 million isn't an outrageous number. 20.1 million guaranteed isn't even an outrageous number either. And if you could, front load some of that money in a lot of ways with the increased cap so that it's less punitive a year from now, even if Daniel Jones is gone, you still have Saquon Barkley, but the number doesn't prevent you from making other decisions. Maybe that's all well and good. But to paraphrase some of the comments from Joe Schoen on this one, well, you have new representatives now, Saquon Barkley, agents that they've worked with and have good working relationships with. We know that Saquon Barkley switched from a year prior. So now what was that? Was that Saquon Barkley saying, well, my last agent didn't do things the way I wanted him to, misgaged the market for me, tried to push for something that was not going to happen, got slapped with the tag, and ultimately had to play under, while lucrative, certainly not the type of contract that you wanted to get. The Giants have indicated they're not going to franchise tag, Saquon Barkley again this year. Neither are the Raiders with Jacobs. Neither is Pollard. So all these running backs are going to go to market. Henry's going to be on the market too. What are all the versions of how some of these players move or potentially stay put, negotiating long-term deals? The difference here is, as Schoen said, again, paraphrasing, listen, things have changed since a year ago for Saquon. He's now the captain, right? He's a key player in the locker room. He continues to always be the type of player that you want to have be a part of your organization. And they said, too, though, likewise, though, the running back market has changed over the last 2 years relative to where it was. And unfortunately, while he appreciates that Saquon wants to get paid, while he believes that he deserves to get paid, you have to take everything into account. So the 2 narratives being built here are, one, that while we love, respect, and appreciate Saquon Barkley, I need to do what's right and prudent at the position and for this organization overall. And contrast that with the other player, Daniel Jones, who is under contract and is going to make $47 million, right? You talk about that player differently because you're already committed to that player. So you can afford to kind of push a different narrative based on where you currently are and the decisions you already made. Again, that contract doesn't seem outrageous to me. I just think that there seems to be something happening here. And when a lot of people point to Saquon Barkley, life after football, right? Being in that media spotlight, that's all well and good. But if I'm him and if I'm the Houston Texans and I can say, you know, I'll give you 25 million guaranteed. I'll give you a $40 million contract. I'll give you a 2-year 35 million, $36 million contract because it doesn't hurt us with all of our cap space. We can cycle through that. We can give our young second-year quarterback a really elite weapon in the backfield and out of the backfield, right? All those things. I can make a somewhat outlandish short-term commitment and not have it hurt me in the big picture, and also signal an elite level of value that they place on Saquon Barkley. And if you're Barkley, well, do I want 20 million guaranteed over 3 years, even to say the Giants were willing to go that route? Or does a short-term deal where I get guaranteed money up front in my pocket right now? Well, we all understand how you can invest and build off of that money. So, yes, the life after football matters, the opportunities, the media, the additional career and money that can be made. But if I can get big money up front right now, why wouldn't I go that route? So I think there's something in there, obviously. And I still stand by that it looks like to me Saquon will end up playing somewhere else. We'll have to wait and see. But free agency will start to tell us this too. Where does the money start to get spent? Do we get any updates? Said Joe Shane that they're going to sit down with the representatives this week. So we'll hear some rumblings, maybe through the combine. But as Shane also mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to get these guys, the rookie class, get in front of them, meet all of them, see some of them, many of them, most of them for the first time, and start to evaluate where are we placing value in the draft. Is there a running back that in and around 107, 139, the Giants start to say, hey, we drafted Eric Gray, to whatever you think that value lies right now for them. We drafted Eric Gray. We have free agency to maybe add a piece. Andy and I highlighted a couple of those type of players last week as well. And then maybe in the draft, right? Is there a mid-round running back, as we've seen historically, who can have success? Yes, of course. So that's going to be a big factor here too. I strongly believe that the combine can influence some of the perception around what they want to do with their own in-house free agents, and then obviously the free agent class overall that's on the market. So all fascinating stuff. And the combine obviously kicks off on Thursday afternoon as well. That being the case, let's go ahead and tell you one thing first and foremost. That you can go over to pietential.com right now, Pietential, and you can take their free online assessment tool, free for individual users, that sets benchmarks for your well-being, provides you with tools to improve it, and tracks your progress over time. It's a great opportunity for Joe Shane, for Brian Dable, for Saquon Barkley, for all the players in the combine, frankly. All these kids, get over to pietential.com because you give yourself an opportunity to make sure that you're keeping your well-being in form as you start to have teams and scouts poke and prod at you and break down whether or not your hand size is slightly too small or your 40 time is a fractional second too low, and then you're going to get bumped down from the 3rd to the 5th round. All those things make Potential critical this time of year for the NFL. Go to potential.com today and check it out. Now, when it comes to the draft, we said alternate opportunities. We've updated Joe Shane on Daniel Jones. We've updated Joe Shane on Saquon Barkley. Is there a world where the New York Football Giants do something different than sitting at 6? Andy talked about this last episode. Hey, I can sit here and let 3 quarterbacks come off the board. I can let Marvin Harrison come off the board. I can let Neighbors come off the board. And I can find myself taking a Dunze if you believe that he's right up there in that top class, as many do in terms of wide receivers and quarterbacks, right? I can take Joe Alt if I really want to go that route. He may fall right to me there at 6. The stand pat opportunity is fantastic. The move up is something that Andy and I push back a little bit against, just because the sacrifice of the draft capital seems, again, if you believe in the quarterback, you go get him. You don't look back. But we just don't believe that that's maybe the best route to go for Big Blue here. Then there is the modest trade down opportunity that I do think is pretty fascinating here for the New York Football Giants. And I want to get into that here coming up next. So when we talk about the draft and we talk about the options here, The New York Football Giants, let's go over on Tankathon. We're also going to use NFL Draft Buzz just for some reference points here as it currently stands. Mock drafts say that currently Caleb Williams to the Bears, the Washington Commanders are going to take Drake May. The Patriots are going to take Jaden Daniels, and there goes the top three quarterbacks, and the Giants didn't make that move. And this is everybody staying essentially pat with where they are inside the draft class. Marvin Harrison Jr. to the Cardinals. Joe Alt, the big left tackle from Notre Dame, goes to the Chargers, and Malik Neighbors falls beautifully into the lap of the New York Football Giants. But let's say that those guys are gone. Let's say that Neighbors ends up going to the Chargers and the Giants look at left tackle and just whether or not they want to make that decision or not, whether or not you're going to have stubbornness from Joe Shane on the idea that Evan Neal is going to turn a corner here. You look back in behind it, and maybe most importantly about this would be, what if Jaden Daniels is still, not even Jaden Daniels, excuse me. What if J.J. McCarthy is getting regarded as a top-tier quarterback? We'll have to see how the combine unfolds for him. Some guys, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, not going to throw. J.J. McCarthy, going to throw, going to try to elevate his profile even further. I don't know if ultimately he ends up at that level, but if there's a conversation about wanting that fourth quarterback, well, then you can have that discussion. And even though you'd say, well, they'll go to 5, right, with the Chargers. No, not if the Giants communicate that we're not taking a quarterback here. You don't need to get ahead of us. You can come, though, and get ahead of a team like the Atlanta Falcons that wants to move up, a team maybe like the Vikings that would have that conversation, who, by the way, take J.J. McCarthy at 11th overall, sitting there at that position. Denver also in that discussion as well. The trade back possibilities where the Giants back themselves up to 8, maybe back themselves up to 11. Is that too far to go? Maybe you can still get Odunze at that point. Certainly at 8, he goes 9 to the Chicago Bears currently in this mock. Or as you start to move down the board, you think about players like Latu out of UCLA, the edge rusher. You start to have conversations about the cornerback class, which this is where I become really fascinated about this. There's a couple of key things here to discuss. Interestingly enough, they have Wiggins out of Clemson going 17 to Jacksonville, and Cooper DeJean out of Iowa actually going 20th, even though per Draft Buzz, you can see that overall on this board right now, we're talking about the Iowa product actually being the number one clear-cut, quarterback on the list, and then you start to work your way down. But the total needs board and how you go about accomplishing filling them really does matter here. So what I mean by that is, let's look at that big board right now. So say the Giants do go wide receiver at the top of the draft. And let's assume that, as we said, highlighted some quarterbacks that maybe they want to take a look at the mid, back end, undrafted, and bring into that mix. Well, now all of a sudden, whether you trade down or just stay at 6 and you get your wide receiver, let's say that it is Neighbors. Well, what's next on your board for you? What have you accomplished? We think that offensive line will be more heavily addressed in free agency than it will through the top end of the draft class right now. So as you back yourself down, though, you start to talk about, as I mentioned, those top 2 cornerbacks that are being discussed there. Wiggins out of Clemson, 18th overall on the draft board. You start to talk about a Mitchell out of Toledo at 21 on the draft board. How far down do you go as you get towards the second round and where the New York Football Giants are going to be picking, before you start to think about a couple of other names that could come up here and potentially be really nice moves for the New York Football Giants? If you're thinking offensive line, by the way, go over to substack.com. Adam Armbrecht, you can read how I took a look at one of those top prospects that could be on the board for the New York Football Giants in and around the top of the second round, and that is one Joe Morgan out of Arizona. Versatile offensive lineman, currently a tackle, could kick inside the guard. But if you're moving away from that, if you took care of it in free agency, now you're having discussions about Robinson, potentially the edge rusher. You're talking about some of those other cornerbacks that are going to be on the board there, like a Lassiter out of Georgia, 6-foot product, 180, needs to bulk up, needs to get bigger, but certainly offers some versatility for this team. And then you even move away from that. Next up, edge rusher, linebacker, right? A guy like Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M, well, he feels like exactly what the Giants need, a multi-role linebacker who comes in. I know I'm running through these things as a bowl as we head towards the combine here. 6'2", 227. You think about the weight, you think about the height, and then you think about the versatility. The pass rushing is there, 86th percentile in that category. Great in run support, 87th percentile. Solid in coverage. As remember, linebacker, edge rusher, 83%. Tackling is his worst contributor here. Adding a little bit of size is certainly going to help him. But another great feature over on DraftBuzz is they talk about offensive rating of the teams that they went against. He's near 80th percentile playing for Texas A&M. So when you think about a mid-level second-round player and you think about getting the weapon at 6 for the wide receiver room, and then adding maybe a cornerback, adding maybe an edge rusher linebacker, looking at the offensive line room, right? How do we get through those top tier of picks for the New York Football Giants and come out the other side feeling like you've improved this team in a substantial way? And that's what makes starting tomorrow with the combine an incredibly exciting opportunity for the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen. When you look through this draft class, and I mentioned I'm talking about there in the top of that board at the second round. Mentioned a guy like Jordan Morgan. Mentioned an edge rusher like Robinson. Talk about a player like Lassiter. Talk about Braswell out of Bama as well. Highlighted Cooper. I can talk about Jenkins, edge rusher out of Michigan. There are names, and then you get into cornerbacks like Tampa out of Iowa State, who again at 6'2", 200 pounds, you start to have a different conversation about some of these players and where they are, tackling being a major concern for him. But these players in that range, top of the second round, talking about the 70th overall pick, even all the way back to 107, that's the critical mass here. Guess what? Whether the Giants go get the quarterback at 6, move up for a quarterback at 6, or stand at 6 and get the wide receiver, the talent pool is so elite there that you're going to get a quality player no matter which direction you ultimately go. You hope you don't have another Evan Neal on your hands, but you feel pretty confident about being able to get an elite talent. Then as you move into that second and third and fourth round territory, we said this is where franchises are built through their core, through the middle of the draft, those key role players. And I find this class and some of these prospects that we're going to see over the weekend to be absolutely enticing for the New York Football Giants. And that's why, regardless of what Joe Schoen says about Daniel Jones, regardless of what he says about Saquon Barkley, free agency and the draft are going to be critical, and these next 5 days are going to be critical. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's 4 days. I can do hard math. All of these key prospects are going to be there. It starts with defensive linemen, linebackers, Thursday afternoon, 3 p.m. I don't know whether or not, stay alert on YouTube, One Giant Podcast. May sit and do a live watch with it as I track and go ahead and try to put together what I think are players that I've liked, players that I'm watching as we work our way through the weekend. Maybe some of them rise or fall. Or I'll come in afterwards and do the breakdown and highlight those players. I want to make for interesting content. I don't want to make for a live video watch party where we all sit here and I quietly notate to myself. But be alert on One Giant Podcast on YouTube, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, and at Adam Armbrecht. This is, I don't know, not everybody loves this. They think it's just guys standing around t-shirts and shorts, getting poked and prodded, and it's informal conversations and interviews and all that stuff. I think that for the middle of the draft, for those prospects, this weekend is massive. For some of those players, even all at the board to a J.J. McCarthy, this is a chance to prove that some of the things you maybe weren't asked to do consistently at Michigan because of the scheme they ran are not things you are incapable of doing. They are just things you didn't have to do to play winning football. This is an electric time for me. I love the offseason for the NFL. I love the combine, free agency, draft, all of those things. So be tuned in, be plugged in, and we'll continue to break down all things New York Football Giants on all those great platforms. Get to onegiantpodcast.com. I mentioned Jordan Morgan. That profile article is up. And then moving forward, we're going to do some more short form. What do the Giants currently have on their roster? What would be a free agent target, and what would be the prospect that I would look at every key position? You can get over there all throughout Wednesday, late afternoon into the evening, Thursday morning, specifically looking at defensive line and linebacker, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm going to be trying to push out as many short form clips as I can, and you can start to see how I construct a bit of my profile board coming out of the combine, and heading towards the draft as well. And then, yes, a mock draft is coming. I know everyone enjoys those. At least I do. Andy Macko, he doesn't like to get into those waters too early. Never too early. We'll be doing those too as well. So on the podcast feed, on YouTube, I need to take a breath. Please continue to support the show. Get to manscaped.com, promo code OGP24. Supporting our sponsors supports this show. It means the world to us, legitimately. We don't get to keep doing this and trying to build this thing without your support. And that does mean sometimes supporting the sponsors as well. So go check those out if you have a need that they can provide for you. Thank you so much. Combine kicking off. We'll be back next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay. Demand that people know. Let's go Big Blue.